Nursing home furnishings accumulate over decades of operation. Donated pieces, outdated equipment, and furniture that becomes part of the facility's character despite administrative plans for replacement. At Golden Years Care Center, Room 9 contained an antique dresser with an attached mirror that had been there since before my employment began 9 years earlier. Several residents had requested the mirror's removal, claiming it showed disturbing images, but somehow it never made it onto the maintenance work orders. The mirror remained, reflecting the daily activities of whoever occupied Room 9, accumulating the visual memories of residents who spent their final years in front of its silvered surface. Mrs. Ruth Morrison had been living in Room 9 for 6 months when she began mentioning visitors who came through the mirror. "They look so tired, dear," she told me during evening medication rounds. "Sometimes I want to invite them to sit down and rest." "Who looks tired, Mrs. Morrison?" "The people in the mirror. They work so hard, but they look exhausted." I assumed she was experiencing the visual hallucinations common among elderly residents with cognitive decline. The mirror was old, possibly distorted, and could create optical illusions that confused residents already struggling with dementia. "The mirror just reflects the room, Mrs. Morrison. Sometimes the lighting can play tricks on our eyes." But Mrs. Morrison remained insistent about her mirror visitors. "There's a young woman with dark hair who looks like she never sleeps, and an older man with bandages on his arms. They need help, but I don't know how to reach them." Other residents who had lived in Room 9 made similar comments about the mirror showing people who weren't in the room, always healthcare workers, always looking injured or exhausted, always appearing to work despite their obvious distress. I began paying closer attention to the mirror during my rounds, but I saw only normal reflections: residents in their beds, furniture, the institutional decor that filled all our patient rooms. Nothing unusual or disturbing about the images reflected in the antique glass. But on Thursday night, while helping Mrs. Morrison prepare for bed, I caught sight of something. That made me pause. My reflection in the mirror looked different, not dramatically altered, but subtly wrong. The woman looking back at me appeared older, more tired, with stress lines around her eyes that didn't match my actual appearance. I stepped closer to examine the reflection more carefully. The face in the mirror showed signs of exhaustion that went beyond normal end-of-shift fatigue. Dark circles under the eyes, hollow cheeks, the kind of weariness that comes from years of overwork and insufficient rest. But I felt fine. Tired from a busy shift, but not the bone-deep exhaustion that the mirror seemed to show. "You see them too," Mrs. Morrison said quietly. "The people who work too hard." I looked at her reflection in the mirror. She appeared exactly as she should. Elderly woman in her nightgown, sitting on the edge of her bed, preparing for sleep. But my reflection continued to show signs of distress that didn't match my physical condition. I raised my hand to touch my face, checking for the stress lines that appeared so prominent in the mirror. My reflection raised its hand as well, but the gesture looked different. Weary, defeated, like someone who had given up trying to provide adequate care. "Mrs. Morrison, do you see anything unusual about my reflection?" She studied the mirror carefully. "You look very tired, dear. Maybe you should rest." But when I looked directly at myself, bypassing the mirror, I saw my normal appearance. The exhaustion and stress lines existed only in the reflected image. Over the following weeks, I began checking my reflection in Room 9's mirror during each shift. The image consistently showed a version of myself that appeared overworked, stressed, and physically worn down by years of patient care. Sometimes the reflection showed bruises on my arms from patient lifting and repositioning. Sometimes it displayed the kind of back pain posture that comes from bending over beds for hours. Sometimes the reflected version of myself appeared to be crying, though I felt no emotional distress. The mirror seemed to be showing the cumulative physical cost of nursing work, injuries, fatigue, and emotional exhaustion that I hadn't yet consciously recognized. But the most unsettling aspect was when the reflection began moving independently. During one late-night medication round, I glanced at the mirror and saw my reflection raise its hand to wave at me. I hadn't moved my hand, but the woman in the mirror was clearly trying to get my attention. I stopped what I was doing and faced the mirror directly. My reflection looked back with obvious concern, pointing to her own arm and then to mine. When I looked down, I noticed a small cut on my forearm that I hadn't been aware of, probably from catching my arm on a bed rail earlier in the shift. The reflection had been trying to warn me about an injury I hadn't noticed. From that point forward, the mirror became a diagnostic tool for recognizing work-related health issues. My reflection would indicate areas of concern, pointing to sore muscles, highlighting fatigue patterns, showing the physical wear that accumulated during long shifts. Other staff members began reporting similar experiences when they entered Room 9, reflections that showed work-related injuries, stress indicators, and signs of burnout that weren't immediately apparent to the healthcare workers themselves. "I look terrible in that mirror," complained Sarah, one of our younger nurses, "like I'd been working double shifts for months." "How do you actually feel?" "Fine, I guess. But the mirror made me realize I've been ignoring some back pain." The mirror appeared to be providing early warning about occupational health issues, showing healthcare workers the long-term consequences of physically demanding patient care before those effects became debilitating. Dr. Patterson, our medical director, examined the mirror when I reported the phenomenon. "Interesting optical properties," he concluded. "The silvering is original, probably contains mercury, which can create unusual visual effects. But the reflections show accurate health information. Mirrors don't diagnose medical conditions, but they might help people recognize symptoms they've been ignoring." However, Dr. Patterson's own reflection in the mirror showed him with obvious signs of cardiovascular stress, facial flushing, labored breathing, the kind of strain that precedes heart problems. "Doctor, when was your last physical exam? How many nices?" Considered the question. "It's been a while. Maybe I should schedule a checkup." 2 weeks later, Dr. Patterson was hospitalized for a minor heart attack that could have been fatal if not detected early. The mirror had provided advance warning of a cardiac condition that standard medical examinations hadn't yet identified. Administration eventually decided to remove the mirror from Room 9, concerned that it was causing anxiety among staff and residents. But when the maintenance crew attempted to relocate it, they found the mirror impossible to move. It appeared to be somehow attached to the dresser in a way that prevented separation. The screws holding it in place wouldn't turn, the frame seemed fused to the wooden backing, and efforts to force removal threatened to damage both pieces of furniture. "Must be some kind of old-fashioned construction technique," the maintenance supervisor concluded. "These antique pieces were built to last." The mirror remained in Room 9, continuing to provide health assessments for anyone who looked into its surface. Staff members learned to use it as an early warning system for work-related injuries and stress indicators. Mrs. Morrison lived in Room 9 for another year before passing away peacefully in her sleep. Her replacement, Mr. Johnson, immediately noticed the mirror's unusual properties. "That mirror shows me things I need to know," he told me. "Like when I should ask for help instead of trying to do everything myself. Some diagnostic tools I've learned don't appear in medical supply catalogs." The mirror in Room 9 serves as a reminder that healthcare workers often ignore their own physical needs while caring for others, providing reflections that show the true cost of professional dedication. And sometimes the most important medical advice comes from antique mirrors that refuse to be removed, showing us versions of ourselves that we need to see even when we're not ready to acknowledge the physical toll of caring for others. The mirror remains in Room 9, reflecting not just what we look like, but what our work is doing to our bodies and our spirits, providing early warning that caring for others requires caring for ourselves as well. End-of-life care requires a different kind of professional intuition. After 16 years in hospice nursing at Serenity Gardens Care Facility, I had learned to recognize the subtle signs that indicate when residents are approaching their final hours. Changes in breathing patterns, skin color variations, the particular stillness that settles over patients who are preparing to let go. But I had never received advanced documentation of a death that hadn't yet occurred. The printed death certificate appeared on my desk during Tuesday night's shift, placed neatly between patient medication records and daily care logs. Standard state form, properly formatted, bearing the name of Mr. Harold Chen in room 318. Time of death, 3:47 a.m. Attending nurse, Emu Rodriguez, RN. Cause of death, respiratory failure secondary to end-stage lung disease. My initials, my professional. Assessment, my clinical judgment. But it was only 11:30 p.m. and Mr. Chen was still alive. I walked to room 318 to check on his condition. Mr. Chen was resting comfortably, breathing steadily with the assistance of oxygen therapy, showing no signs of immediate distress. His daughter sat beside the bed, reading quietly while maintaining the vigil that family members often keep during hospice care. "How is he tonight?" I asked softly. "About the same," she replied. "Peaceful. The breathing seems a little more labored than yesterday, but not dramatically different." I reviewed Mr. Chen's chart. End-stage chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, admitted to hospice care 2 weeks earlier when curative treatments were no longer appropriate. His condition was stable but declining, consistent with the natural progression of his illness. Nothing in his presentation suggested that death was imminent within the next 4 hours. But the death certificate on my desk was specific about timing. 3:47 a.m. I consulted with Dr. Williams, our hospice medical director, about Mr. Chen's prognosis. "How much time do you think he has remaining?" Dr. Williams examined the patient carefully, assessing respiratory effort, circulation, and overall condition. "Difficult to predict precisely. Days to weeks, possibly. But he seems stable tonight." "Not hours?" "I wouldn't think so." "Why?" I showed him the printed death certificate, explaining how I had found it on my desk with a predicted time of death. Dr. Williams studied the document with professional interest. "This is properly formatted, medically accurate, and contains appropriate clinical observations. But you can't write a death certificate before someone dies." "I didn't write it. I found it already completed." "That's impossible. Death certificates are official documents that require physician verification of actual death. But the certificate contained my signature and clinical notes that accurately described Mr. Chen's condition and the expected cause of his death." I returned to room 318 at midnight to reassess Mr. Chen's status. His breathing had become slightly more irregular, and his oxygen saturation had decreased minimally. Changes consistent with disease progression, but not indicating immediate death. His daughter noticed the subtle decline. "He seems different tonight, more tired." "These changes are part of the natural process," I explained. "We'll keep him comfortable and monitor his condition closely." But I was thinking about the death certificate that predicted respiratory failure at 3:47 a.m. At 1 a.m., Mr. Chen's breathing pattern shifted to the irregular rhythm that sometimes precedes death. His daughter became more attentive, sensing the change in her father's condition. "Is this it?" she asked. "It could be. The breathing changes suggest he's beginning the final stages. I'll stay close and make sure he's comfortable." At 2 a.m., Mr. Chen's circulation began to change. His extremities became cooler, his pulse grew weaker, and his skin took on the pallor that indicates approaching death. The timeline was matching the death certificate's prediction exactly. Dr. Williams arrived at 2:30 a.m. to assess Mr. Chen's condition. "He's definitely declining, probably hours at most." The death certificate predicted 3:47 a.m. "We'll see. These transitions can be unpredictable." But Mr. Chen's decline continued with mechanical precision. Each symptom appeared exactly when the death certificate's timeline suggested it should occur. At 3:30 a.m., his breathing became more labored. At 3:40 a.m., the irregular pattern intensified. At 3:45 a.m., his respirations became very shallow and infrequent. His daughter held his hand, whispering words of love and comfort as her father approached the moment predicted on the mysterious death certificate. At exactly 3:47 a.m., Harold Chen took his final breath. Dr. Williams verified the death and completed the official medical certification. Time of death, 3:47 a.m. Cause, respiratory failure secondary to end-stage lung disease. Identical to the death certificate that had appeared on my desk 4 hours earlier. I filed both documents in Mr. Chen's medical record, the predicted certificate that had appeared mysteriously, and the official certificate completed after his death. Both contained identical information, signed by the same professionals, documenting the same clinical observations. But one had been completed before the death occurred. Over the following weeks, additional death certificates began appearing on my desk during night shifts, always properly formatted, always accurate, always predicting deaths that occurred exactly on schedule. Mrs. Patterson, room 295, time of death, 6:23 a.m. She died precisely at 6:23 a.m. from the cardiac complications listed on the pre-printed certificate. Mr. Thompson, room 301, time of death, 4:15 a.m. Respiratory failure occurred at exactly 4:15 a.m., matching the advanced documentation. Each predicted death happened exactly as described in the mysterious certificates, allowing me to provide appropriate family notification and ensure comfort measures were in place at the predicted time. "How do you know when patients are going to die?" asked Janet, the day shift supervisor. "Your timing is remarkably accurate. I couldn't explain that I was receiving advanced death certificates for patients whose final moments were apparently being scheduled by unknown administrative processes. But the advanced documentation allowed me to provide better end-of-life care. Families could be contacted with appropriate timing, pain management could be optimized for the final hours, and spiritual care could be arranged to meet patients' needs during their transition. Dr. Williams began consulting with me about prognosis estimates, noting my improved accuracy in predicting death timing. "Your clinical judgment has become exceptionally precise, Maria. How are you making these assessments?" "Experience, I suppose. Recognizing patterns." But the real answer was that I was reading advanced death certificates that provided specific timing and clinical details for upcoming deaths. The certificates continued appearing throughout my hospice nursing career, always accurate, always allowing me to prepare families and provide appropriate care during patients' final hours. I've come to think of the advanced death certificates as a form of administrative efficiency that exists outside normal bureaucratic processes. Someone, somewhere, is scheduling end-of-life transitions and providing advance notice to ensure that professional care is available exactly when needed. The timing is never arbitrary. Each predicted death occurs when the patient is ready, when family members can be present, when pain and suffering have been minimized through appropriate medical intervention. Some scheduling, I've learned, transcends normal administrative systems. And some of the most important paperwork arrives before the events it documents, ensuring that death occurs with dignity, timing, and professional attention that serves the patient's needs rather than bureaucratic convenience. The advanced death certificates represent preparation that allows families to say goodbye properly, patients to receive optimal comfort care, and healthcare providers to honor the precise timing of transitions that have been scheduled with compassion and clinical accuracy. Food service in nursing homes operates with mathematical precision. Each meal is planned, prepared, and delivered according to the exact census count, ensuring that every resident receives appropriate nutrition while minimizing waste. During my 11 years as dietary supervisor at Brookside Manor, I had maintained detailed records of meal preparation and distribution, accounting for every tray that left the kitchen, which is why the extra meal tray that appeared consistently during evening service created such a puzzling inventory problem. The pattern began in October. My kitchen staff would prepare dinner for 43 residents according to the official census, but when the meal carts were loaded for distribution, we would find 44 trays, always one extra, always properly plated, always steaming hot, always identical to the regular dinner service. "Did someone miscount the census?" I asked Maria, our head cook. She double-checked her preparation lists. 43 residents, 43 meals prepared, but there's definitely an extra tray here. The additional tray contained the same meal as all others. Tonight it was meatloaf, mashed potatoes, green beans, and a dinner roll. Standard Brookside Manor dinner service, properly portioned and attractively presented. But we had only prepared 43 meals. I counted the trays myself. 44 complete dinners, all hot and ready for delivery. Either my census count was wrong, or the kitchen had somehow produced an extra meal without using additional ingredients. Take the extra tray to the break room, I decided. One of the night staff can eat it. But when I checked the break room later, the tray was untouched. The food remained hot despite sitting unattended for 3 hours, and the meal showed no signs of cooling or deterioration. The next evening, we prepared dinner for 43 residents and again found 44 trays ready for distribution. The extra meal was identical to the regular service: chicken parmesan, rice pilaf, steamed broccoli, and a breadstick. "This is impossible," Maria said, checking her ingredients inventory. "I used exactly the right amounts for 43 portions. But somehow we have an extra complete meal." I decided to investigate the phenomenon more systematically. Over the following week, I monitored meal preparation closely, verifying ingredient portions and counting completed trays at each stage of service. The results were consistent. We prepared the correct number of meals according to our census, but always discovered one additional tray when meals were ready for distribution. The extra tray appeared fully prepared, properly heated, and indistinguishable from the regular service. But it represented food that shouldn't have existed based on our ingredient usage and preparation quantities. "Maybe one of the cooks is making an extra meal without realizing it," suggested Janet, our evening supervisor. But I observed the entire meal preparation process. Each cook followed the established recipes and portion controls precisely. No one prepared additional servings or used extra ingredients. Yet the extra tray appeared consistently, containing food that came from nowhere. I began leaving the extra tray in different locations to see what would happen to it. Sometimes in the break room, sometimes in the serving area, sometimes in the main dining hall after regular meal service ended. The pattern was always the same. By morning, the tray would be empty, with utensils neatly stacked and the plate cleaned as if someone had eaten the meal thoroughly. But security cameras showed no one approaching the extra tray during overnight hours. The food simply disappeared, leaving behind clean dishes arranged with the precision of someone who had enjoyed a satisfying meal. "Maybe we have mice," suggested one of the kitchen staff. But mice don't eat entire portions of meatloaf and mashed potatoes, and they don't stack silverware neatly after finishing their meals. I consulted with administration about the mysterious extra meal. The business manager was concerned about food costs and inventory control. "Are we being charged for 44 meals when we should be preparing 43? I checked our food service costs. The financial records showed purchases appropriate for 43 residents, but somehow we were producing 44 complete meals from those ingredients. It's like we're getting extra food value from our grocery budget," I explained. "The additional meal doesn't cost us anything in terms of ingredients or preparation time. But accounting principles don't allow for meals that appear without corresponding ingredient costs." Dr. Peterson, our medical director, suggested that the extra meal might represent food prepared for residents who died between census counts and meal preparation. Sometimes there's a lag between a death and census updates, but I cross-referenced the extra meal occurrences with resident deaths. No correlation. The extra tray appeared consistently regardless of whether anyone had died recently. After 3 months of documentation, I decided to test whether the extra meal was intended for a specific person. I prepared a place card with the name guest and placed it beside the extra tray. The next morning, the tray was empty as usual, but the place card remained with a handwritten note added below the guest designation. "Thank you, E.M." Someone had eaten the meal and left a thank you note. But no one with the initials E.M. was listed on our resident roster, staff directory, or visitor logs. I began leaving notepaper beside the extra tray, hoping to establish communication with whoever was consuming the mysterious meals. The responses were always polite and grateful. "Delicious as always. Much appreciated. The meatloaf reminds me of home cooking. Thank you for the extra dessert tonight." All signed E.M. in neat handwriting that didn't match any staff members. Script. The evening staff began referring to the extra meal as E.M.'s dinner, understanding that someone appreciated our food service even though we couldn't identify who was eating it. "Should we be concerned about an unauthorized person accessing our facility?" asked the night security guard. But whoever E.M. was, they posed no threat to residents or staff. They ate their meal quietly, cleaned up afterward, and expressed gratitude. For the food service, I started varying the extra meal slightly, adding special touches that went beyond standard service. An extra dinner roll, a larger portion of dessert, premium ingredients when available. The thank you notes reflected appreciation for these enhancements. The chocolate cake was exceptional tonight. The extra butter for the bread was thoughtful. You're very kind to add fresh fruit. EM noticed and appreciated the efforts to make their dining experience special. 6 months later, administration conducted a historical review of Brookside Manor's records. The archivist discovered documentation of a former resident named Eleanor Martinez, who had lived in the facility 15 years earlier. She was known for her appreciation of the kitchen staff, the archivist reported. Always complimented the food service and wrote thank you notes to the dietary department. Eleanor Martinez. EM. The handwriting samples from her old resident file matched the thank you notes left beside the empty meal trays. But Eleanor Martinez had died 12 years before I began working at Brookside Manor. I've come to accept that some residents never really leave the dining program, continuing to appreciate good food and expressing gratitude for meal service that meets their nutritional and emotional needs. Eleanor's extra meal represents the continuation of dining relationships that transcend the normal boundaries between life and death, ensuring that appreciation for good food continues, even after official residence has ended. The kitchen staff has embraced EM's presence as validation of their professional skills. Knowing that someone continues to enjoy their cooking and express gratitude provides satisfaction that goes beyond serving living residents. Some meal service, I've learned, extends beyond census counts and official resident rosters. And some of the most meaningful feedback comes from diners who appreciate good food enough to continue eating with us long after they've officially left the building. Mobility equipment in nursing homes must be carefully managed to prevent accidents and ensure availability for residents who depend on wheelchairs for basic transportation. At Maple Grove Care Center, we maintained strict protocols for securing wheelchairs overnight, locked in designated storage areas or chained to prevent unauthorized movement that could pose safety hazards. But one wheelchair consistently refused to stay where we left it. The problem began with our security system upgrade. New cameras were installed throughout the facility to enhance resident safety monitoring and provide comprehensive surveillance of common areas. The improved coverage meant that every hallway, every common room, and every corridor was under constant observation, which is how we discovered that wheelchair number 7 was taking midnight journeys through the West Wing. I first noticed it during my Monday morning review of overnight security footage. At exactly 12 a.m., wheelchair 7 appeared at the end of the West Corridor, moving slowly but steadily down the hallway with no one pushing or guiding it. The chair rolled in a straight line, maintaining consistent speed, navigating the corridor as if operated by an invisible resident. It passed the nurses' station, continued past rooms 15 and 16, and stopped precisely in front of room 17. Room 17 had been vacant for 6 months. The wheelchair remained motionless outside room 17 for approximately 30 minutes, then returned to the equipment storage area where it had originally been secured. Equipment malfunction, I concluded, thinking the wheelchair's brakes had failed and it had simply rolled due to floor incline. But Maple Grove's floors were level, and wheelchair 7 had no mechanical defects that would cause autonomous movement. Reviewed the footage more carefully. The wheelchair's movement was deliberate and controlled, not the random rolling that would result from brake failure. It followed a specific route, stopped at a predetermined destination, and returned to its starting point with obvious intention. On Tuesday night, I monitored the West Wing personally during the midnight hour. At 11:55 p.m., I positioned myself at the nurses' station with a clear view of the entire corridor. The hallway remained empty and quiet throughout the night. No wheelchair movement, no unusual activity, no evidence of the phenomenon captured by security cameras. But when I reviewed Tuesday night's footage the next morning, the cameras showed the same pattern. Wheelchair 7 leaving storage at midnight, rolling down the West Corridor, stopping at room 17, and returning after 30 minutes. The security system was recording events that I hadn't observed despite being present during the same time period. Decided to investigate room 17 to understand why the wheelchair consistently stopped there. The room had been empty since Mrs. Elizabeth Hartwell passed away 6 months earlier. Standard vacant room. Bed made with fresh linens, furniture in place, but no personal belongings or medical equipment. But when I examined the floor outside room 17, I found faint tire marks consistent with wheelchair wheels. The marks were fresh, as if made recently, and they matched the tread pattern of our facility's standard mobility equipment. The wheelchair was leaving physical evidence of its midnight visits, even though I couldn't observe the movement directly. Consulted with Tom, our maintenance supervisor, about the mysterious wheelchair tracks. He examined the marks and confirmed they came from our equipment. "These are definitely from one of our chairs," he reported. "Recent marks, probably made within the last few hours. But I secured all wheelchairs in storage before midnight. Let me check the storage area." Tom verified that all wheelchairs were properly locked in their designated locations. No missing equipment, no security breaches, no explanation for how wheelchair 7 could leave storage and return without detection. But the tire marks outside room 17 continued to appear nightly, always fresh, always indicating recent wheelchair. Traffic to a room that housed no residents. I began reviewing historical records about Mrs. Elizabeth Hartwell, the last resident of room 17. She had been a wheelchair user throughout her stay at Maple Grove, dependent on mobility assistance due to arthritis and leg weakness. Mrs. Hartwell was very particular about her evening routine, remembered Sarah, one of our senior nurses. She always took a short wheelchair ride through the West Wing before bedtime. Said it helped her sleep better. Which route did she take? Down the West Corridor, past the nurse's station, then back to her room. Same pattern every night for 2 years. The exact route that wheelchair 7 was taking during its midnight journeys. I installed motion sensors in the West Corridor to detect movement that might not be visible to human observation. The sensors activated nightly at midnight, indicating movement consistent with wheelchair traffic. But when I investigated personally, the hallway remained empty. Something was triggering the motion sensors and creating wheelchair tracks, but remaining invisible to direct observation. Dr. Martinez, our facility administrator, was concerned about the security implications of equipment that moved independently. If wheelchairs are leaving storage without authorization, we could have liability issues. But our insurance company required proof of actual safety hazards before considering policy modifications. The midnight wheelchair journeys hadn't caused accidents or endangered residents. "It's unusual, but not necessarily dangerous," the insurance representative concluded. "Document the phenomenon and continue monitoring." I began leaving notepaper outside room 17, hoping to communicate with whatever was operating wheelchair 7 during its nightly visits. The notes disappeared overnight, but no written responses appeared. However, I noticed that the wheelchair's behavior became more responsive to facility activities. On nights when room 17 was cleaned or maintained, the wheelchair would arrive earlier and remain longer, as if supervising the work. When new residents were given tours of the facility, the wheelchair would appear in the West Corridor during visiting hours, rolling slowly past prospective patients and their families. The chair seemed to be continuing Mrs. Hartwell's interest in facility operations, maintaining her evening routine and her concern for other residents' welfare. Staff members began acknowledging the wheelchair's presence during their rounds. "Good evening, Mrs. Hartwell," they would whisper when encountering fresh tire marks outside room 17. The wheelchair tracks would appear more prominently after these greetings, as if appreciation for recognition encouraged more obvious manifestations. Eventually installed a small memorial plaque near room 17, in memory of Elizabeth Hartwell, who found peace in her evening journeys through these halls. The wheelchair continued its midnight routine, but the tire marks became less pronounced, as if the gesture of remembrance had provided some form of completion or satisfaction. 6 months later, room 17 was assigned to a new resident who also required wheelchair assistance. Mr. Johnson was initially confused by the tire marks that appeared outside his room each morning. "Someone's been riding around outside my door," he mentioned during breakfast. But after living in room 17 for several weeks, Mr. Johnson began looking forward to the nightly evidence of wheelchair activity. "It's nice to know someone else enjoys evening rides through these halls," he said. "Makes me feel less alone." The Wheelchair 7's midnight journeys continue, but they now include brief stops at other rooms where wheelchair-dependent residents live, as if Mrs. Hartwell is checking on fellow patients who share her mobility challenges. Some evening routines, I've learned, become permanent features of the facilities where they provided comfort and peace. And some residents continue their nightly activities long after they've moved beyond the need for physical mobility assistance. The wheelchair tracks outside room 17 represent the persistence of gentle habits that brought comfort during difficult times, reminding us that the most important journeys are often the quiet ones that help people find peace in places designed to provide care during life's final chapters.